Good evening, everyone. And do you like the new lectern? This is the debut. You got a pre-showing of the new lectern, I'm so excited about this. It is see-through, so you can see, the beautiful stage behind and everything. Thank you for coming tonight. I thought I'd do a little introduction to get us started, and then we'll hand over to Suzanne. So the way the night will go is there'll be two halves with a bit of a supper in between. So Beck and Graham have organised a supper for us so we can enjoy that together. We're also live streaming today, so there's a couple of people watching on the live stream. They asked special requests, so I've granted the special request. I hope that you gain benefit from this as well, and it'll be recorded as well. So the Bible has things to say about marriage from the very first pages. We learn in the creation story that God has made humanity in his image and likeness, both male and female. And we learn of the profound equality between men and women, and yet of a difference between men and women too. The differences are expressed in the creation story by the man being created first and then the woman being made out of the man's ribs while he was in a deep sleep. The woman is given to the man as his perfect helper, and there's no one else in creation to fulfill that role. So God does not create another man to help the man. He creates a woman, which is a beautiful thing. We learn of the task given to men and women together to rule over the creation, to be fruitful and multiply. A task able to be fulfilled within the faithful union of man and woman in marriage. And this union is a real union, a real oneness. Genesis 2:24 says, "This is why a man leaves his father and mother and is united to his wife, and they become one flesh." We learn in the Old Testament that marriage is one of the closest analogues to God's covenant with his people, because it's meant to be a committed relationship between God and his people where promises are made and kept. Sadly, the people don't keep their promises. We learn in the New Testament that marriage is an analogue for Christ's love for his church, the one he gave himself up for, the one he laid his life down for. Marriage is therefore about love, and it's a mirror of God's love for us. In the Christian view, marriage is not the only path to a wonderful life, a fulfilling, fruitful life. Singleness is also a path to a wonderful life. Both ways are important and good. One is not superior to the other in the Christian worldview, which was a radical thing when Christianity came into the world. No one else thought that about singleness before. But in marriage, it's about serving our spouse and together serving the world. In singleness is also about serving the world as well in a different way. We know that sadly marriage is impacted by sin. We know that we are selfish, that we fail to love our spouse, and we need to reflect on our marriages, therefore, and to invest in our marriages and grow as people through our marriages. And as a minister, I'm reminded often of the joy and the love that people experience in their marriages, and yet also the horror and the pain that people experience when their marriages are going off the rails for whatever reason. So as an expression of my pastoral care for the church, I've invited Suzanne to come to speak to us on the subject of marriage, such an important thing for us to consider and dwell on in our own marriages, and also as we potentially counsel other people in marriages. Maybe our friends might ask us for advice, maybe our children might ask us for advice. It's good for us to be thoughtful and equipped to know what to say to them as well. To reference a movie that has Brad Pitt and Angelina Jolie in it, if our car needs a regular service, then why not our marriages too? And so let's pop the hood and take a look, basically, and get onto it. But let me pray, and then I'll invite Suzanne up the front. Father, we thank you for the gift of marriage. We thank you for the way that it is a window onto your love for your world, for your people, and for Christ's love for his church, his bride. And I pray for us as we listen today, that you would help us to learn and grow through what we hear. And may our marriages be honouring to you and deeply wonderful for ourselves and our spouse. In Jesus' name, amen. Thanks, Suzanne.
Alrighty. Thank you everyone for coming, and thank you for those that may be watching online. I'm not exactly sure where to look over there. It's an absolute joy to be with you tonight and to speak on this topic. Just a little bit about myself. My husband and I, who's husband up the back there, Stuart, we moved to Wentworth Falls about 2.5 years ago, but prior to that I lived in Lithgow and worked in Bathurst and Lithgow mostly Bathurst, for about 23 years for an organisation called Centrecare. And when we moved west, I approached that organisation because I cannot tell you where this came from, but I had a really very deep calling to work with couples, what used to be called marriage counselling, and as you're aware, many people are not married these days, so it then sort of became relationship counselling. But this is an area that I'm really passionate about, have worked a great deal in, have been married to my husband for 39 years as well, and I'm actually immensely grateful for us, to be honest, that I did what I did for work, because I can say that and I think he would agree with this, that it's been a real blessing actually to our own relationship doing what I've done for work, because we've been able to apply the sort of material that I've learnt about. So I'm going to try really hard to not go off script tonight. My tendency is to go off on tangents, but I'm going to work really hard not to because of time constraints, well, especially because of time constraints. So Zach, can I just ask you, what time do you want to break for supper? 10 to? Okay, cool. Yeah, no, that's fine. So I'm really hoping that I've got the content right tonight, that I don't think I've got too little, but I hope I haven't got too much. But we'll see how we go. Okay, so what I hope to achieve this evening and the limitations to tonight, I'm hoping to draw attention to what most readily came to my mind when I thought about what to speak about. So there are huge amounts of things that could be said about building and maintaining a marriage, but I'm hoping that what I've included tonight, it certainly does not cover everything I'd like to say, nor everything that really needs to be said, but I hope I've done a sufficient coverage of some things that I'm sure what I'm talking about will be relevant. So I think we've got 2 sections of about 35 minutes, and I'm not 100% where I'll break, but I'll break around about halfway through. I'm hoping that possibly we might have some time for Q&A. We'll wait and see how much time there is. And also I'd suggest if you wish to take key points on your phone, please, if you have your phone or a pen, I can give you a pen and paper if you want one. For those of you who do have phones, and I think most people do, if you want to take any notes, please don't just have your head down the whole time, but there might be things that I say that you think, I really want to remember that. So, hello, people at the back. Alrighty. Okay, tonight I'm hoping it will be relevant to couples in distress, couples wanting to invest in their relationship, couples after some practical ideas to improve their relationship, those hoping to get ideas about how to establish a strong marriage, those who may have opportunity to speak into the lives of others, but I'm at pains to say, if that is you and you're hoping to leave this place with the opportunity and the hope that you can speak into the lives of other couples, please be wise in how you do that. But it's possible you may have that opportunity. So I've tried really hard to make tonight relevant. Not everything will be relevant to every stage of your relationship, but I'm hoping you'll pick up something along the way. Alrighty. Just to be aware tonight, I will be making some generalisations. They may not apply to your relationship. So please, if I say some things and you think, well, that's not us, and please don't take offence, because I may say something that may not be relevant to you, but it might be very, very relevant to other people in the room. All the slides that I've got could be expanded on. There are huge limitations, but as I said, I've hopefully got enough content to make this really useful. I hope to give you a taste, and as a couple you can follow up on the slides very readily on much of what I'm saying, including there's vast amounts online from the Gottman Institute, which is extremely useful. And I'll be making mention of the Gottman Institute a little bit later on. The content may touch on challenges in your relationship, so I'm mindful if something comes up tonight and it's a delicate area for you, I hope, pray and request that you will attend to that however you need to. And it may be that applying even some of what's in tonight might get your marriage back on track if you are having difficulties in certain areas. And if tonight does uncover any major issues for you, I really urge you to get assistance sooner than later. I haven't looked into the evidence of recent years, but I looked into the evidence many, many years ago, and then, and I suspect it may be worse now, it was couples in distress usually wait about 7 years to get to even think about getting help or approach getting assistance. And I have seen many, many couples in my time that I've thought, if only they'd come sooner. I had an occasion many years ago, a young couple that she'd been trying to get him to come for a long time, and unfortunately that's quite a common presentation. I'm not saying it's always a presentation. It could be women it could be men trying to get their wives as well, but I've many times seen women try to get their men to go, to get some help. And this particular young couple sat with me, and by the time they came, she'd disengaged, she was done. And it was really, really tragic because this man was utterly broken, and the penny had dropped for him, but it had dropped too late and she'd already disengaged. So just take that as a word of warning if that applies to you at all. Alrighty. So I just want to make a few comments about marriage and vows. A vow is a solemn promise in the presence of God and witnesses. A day when both spouses decide and commit to become an us. I'll speak a bit further about that in a second. Both know what they've committed themselves to, and then they can hold themselves to this. Ideally, both have... I better read my own notes because I can hardly see that. Hopefully you guys can... Can you see that adequately? Yeah, okay. Ideally, both have resolved they're ready to give up enough autonomy to be an us. I'm really conscious, my work life, and it continues in some capacity in a small private practice here, which has been wonderful. I've worked with couples, Christian couples, atheist couples, all sorts of couples. And I'm very mindful that a lot of couples are not married. I will be speaking specifically tonight for marriage. We're in a Christian setting. I actually am a Christian. It's a church, and that's what we're on about, or one of the things we're on about. But I'm also mindful that there are people that are in committed partner relationships, and it is possible that some partnered relationships may be operating in a more secure, invested way than some marriages. There are a few things that I've seen, though, that is possibly relevant to marriages, but is very often relevant to partnered relationships, where couples... I've seen many relationships sort of move in together and then later on they have children and they're very invested. But when you actually explore the issues with them, they have actually never really made a permanent commitment to become an us. They've kind of just slid into the commitment. So the commitment, sometimes there isn't a commitment to permanence, and often they haven't actually really thought about, actually, am I ready to give up a level of autonomy, meaning separateness and freedom to be a single? Am I at that point of readiness to do that before they've already had kids and are well and truly in the relationship? So that is actually a topic that can present on, actually, if there's ever any interest in it. What are some of the distinct differences, I guess, between marriage and partnerships? But I'll leave that for now. Okay, so these are some sources for tonight. Which I must say as I said, primarily tonight, I just thought, leading up to tonight, I just thought, what are the things that have come to my mind from my clinical experience, my lived experience, that I think is most pertinent? But in the background with my training, these are some of the sources. my work, like I was thinking, is it hundreds of couples? Am I exaggerating? But I don't think it would be. It is a lot of people. I've seen a lot of people in my time. And I've also worked in family dispute resolution, which is, does anyone here know what family dispute resolution is? You know what it is? Many may not. It's basically, well, it doesn't have to be mediation, but it's commonly mediation in family law. So the organisation I worked with, that was one aspect of the work that I did. So I've worked extensively with parents where they're divorcing and separating, and it's pretty awful often to see. So I've seen in real time the sort of things that, I guess, the behaviours and the heartache and the distress that results when couples don't work out, especially when they have children. Okay. Alrighty, so I'm introducing a different kind of AI tonight, which I'm hoping you'll remember, and it's accept influence. This particular, some of what I'm going to say tonight I just think is common sense, to be honest, but often, you know, the things that we lose track of actually are really common sense, but we need to be reminded of them. So accepting influence needs to be the overarching attitude required by both husband and wife. If something is important to one, it needs to be to the other. It involves valuing your spouse's thoughts, opinions, preferences, feelings, needs and values. And AI is in short supply in couples in distress. A couple of, just a few thoughts, ideas I had was an example of asking for influence to be accepted would be, can you please soften your tone when you speak to me, or please don't walk away when I'm talking to you. Now, rejecting influence would be, I'm out of here, no. Please come with me on this occasion. You know, come with me to something that maybe you don't want to come to, but I really want you to come. Will you come with me on this occasion? And accepting influence would be, yes, I'll come. Rejecting it would be not. So I just want you to keep this whole idea of accepting influence as underpinning or overriding really everything that most of what's talked about tonight. Okay. I want to have a bit of a word about dedication, commitment and constraints, particularly constraints. Examples of constraints are things like children, property, pets, mortgages, rental agreements, furniture, etc. Constraints are inevitable and can help hold couples together during challenging times. Constraints make it hard for both to leave the relationship. However, don't allow your marriage to just be about constraints. So I've seen a lot of couples in my time where they've, through lack of investment, as one, well, that's not the only reason, it could be out of control conflict, it could be any number of things, but they basically now have a marriage or a relationship that is just about constraints. So it's kind of hard to get out, rather than there being a foundation of love and respect and friendship at the foundation of their relationship. So I think one of the things that, as I said, constraints are inevitable if you're with someone for a long period of time, or perhaps not even that long, and they can be really, really helpful in holding you in during difficult times. I'm sure there's people here tonight, I know we could testify to this, that there's been times in our relationship where it's been really, really difficult. And if it probably wasn't for our vow, dedicated commitment, and it's hard to leave when you've been in a marriage for a long time. So constraints can be very helpful, but they're not enough. One of the signs that I've often seen with couples that have just been about constraints, or what pretty much keep them in there, is they pretty much just have functional conversations. That's about it. You know, can you pick the children up? Have you paid that bill? Did you put the oil in? Did you check the oil in the car? Did you vacuum the floor? Did you buy the groceries? So once again, if there's anything I'm saying tonight that you just go, oh shivers, that might be us, doesn't mean it's too late, but it may mean, hey, we need to do some work to fix us. And I think I've said that. So a possible sign of the above is you only have functional and sort of transactional conversations. You know, if you do this, I'll do that. Not a great way to sustain a marriage. Okay. Bids for connection. This is once again a Gottman Institute. Actually, I might stop and mention the Gottman Institute. I'm not going to talk about this in great detail, and I know Merrin and Scott know. Is anyone here familiar with the Gottman Institute? Yep, some people are, yeah. So you can look online, you could spend probably the next 6 months watching material online from the Gottman Institute, but it's basically, and this is very concise, more could be said, but it's there's been long-term research done on the kind of qualities and attitudes, behaviours that are present in committed relationships and marriages that last the distance. So the Gottman Institute has got a wealth of tremendous research and data on the sort of things that need to be present to sustain a marriage and the kind of qualities that you want to avoid or limit as much as possible in order to sustain a relationship. So, and you can look into more of that. There's much more that I could say. So bids for connection need to be given, received and reciprocated. And one way of thinking about a bid for connection is it's an invitation to connect and to share. BFCs made and ignored or turned away from are associated with insecure marriages. And I thought ignored or turned away from, and sometimes just not seen. It's possible, actually knowing about this could be incredibly important to couples where they go, oh, wow, I think about it, my wife or my husband does actually try to connect with me and I'm not noticing it. So this might be something you take away and go, be mindful when your spouse, it could be, which I think I've included here, like a wink across the room. You know, you're in a space and your spouse winks at you. Ignoring them or turning away would be turning your face away, assuming you can wink back. A wink back again would be responding to that bid. A squeeze of the hand, just say or even if your spouse reaches out and holds your hand and you kind of greet it with a dead fish, that would be kind of rejecting a bid. A squeeze back would be accepting a bid for connection. Or it could be, isn't it fantastic to see the sun shining today? And your spouse is rejecting a bid. Accepting a bid would be, yeah, it really is, it's lovely, let's get out for a walk. Okay? And remember, turn towards, not away. So once again, one of the qualities that are present in relationships that aren't doing well is couples are turning away, not towards one another. And I thought, who knows the BFG? It's the best movie. I love this movie so much. I thought this might be a way of remembering the BFCs, not BFG, but you know, if next time you see the BFG, you might think of BFCs perhaps. And just a tremendous movie. Okay. Okay. So invest, prioritise and meaningful rituals. Keep your marriage and your spouse at the top of your priorities, not somewhere down the list. Warning to parents, don't put your marriage on the shelf and only prioritise your children. In my time with couples, as many times I've used the illustration of, are there any gardeners in the room? Anyone like pot plant? I actually like them too much. If anything was going to cause divorce in our household, it might be there's too many plants in the house. I used to use the illustration, imagine having a beautiful plant. It might be a maidenhair or something that's really precious to you. And you tend to it, you water it, you maybe put fertiliser on it if that's required, make sure it gets adequate sunlight. You know, if it's gets frosty outside, you bring it in. You really tend to it. And then you have kids, or perhaps you start your career, or perhaps the demands of extended family become greater, or something happens, and it's like you take that plant and you just put it on the shelf and you go, oh, I'll get back to it sometime. Well, that plant will eventually die if it's not attended to. And I have seen, when I work with couples, one of my early questions in the first session is I ask them, what did you do to intentionally invest in your relationship when you were dating and you started out? And most of the time people can remember something. And then I say, and what do you do now? And the amount of times that I've just been confronted with just a blank expression or, oh, we don't. And it's like the plant. Don't let it, if it's left for too long and there's nothing left, it won't survive. And there can be periods of life, I get it, where you might be able to, times of great stress, you may not be able to tend to the plant too much, but don't let it die. I've also thought too about, I don't think this is often thought about, but I would suggest to you one of the greatest gifts for those of you who have children, one of the greatest gifts that you can give to your children is, one, the security of a secure mum and dad as their base, as like the king and queen of the household, as a secure base for their children. And also to model, and probably more than what I'm going to say, but that would be one. And another one would be modelling to your children how to do grown-up marriage, actually right from the start, so kids actually are observing. So this is how you love each other. This is how you look after each other. I don't think there's too many people that think about that, and instead, many, many, many times I've seen couples have kids and they don't intend it. They don't set out to put the plant on the shelf and neglect it for the next 16 years, but that's actually effectively what they do. So don't neglect your marriage if you've got kids. And if you have been, I strongly urge you to make some changes. Some of the other things I think that we can prioritise over kids is in-laws, parents, friends, sport, work, any number of things. All of those things can be immensely important in and of themselves, but don't let them take the priority. I've included this one, which I'm wondering whether Stuart is going to recognise this picture. I think he might. This is the one that this probably may be the only personal thing I'm going to share. One of the things that we did way, way back when we were very short on money, we had 3 children, no extended family, no one to look after kids, but at the time, and we're going back a long time, decades, we could afford $20 of Chinese, and we loved Honey King prawns, and I think they're the closest Honey King prawns I could get. We could get, this shows inflation, we could pay I think $20 for 2, actually I haven't thought about that, just to show inflation, it was $20. We could get 2 dishes of Chinese, I'd boil rice. We didn't even have a candle holder, so we used a stubby bottle. This is a true story. So we had a stubby bottle with a candle in it, 2 Chinese dishes, I'd make the rice, and our kids had usually nuggets, celery and carrot sticks. Now, I'm not advocating, I know nuggets are not the best thing nutritionally for children, but my kids are still alive and well and they're grown-ups and they're perfectly healthy, so that can't be too bad once in a while. And we taught our children really early on, this is for us, you're not part of this. Not in a mean way, just in a, we matter and you guys can have your nuggets, and no, this is a special time for Dad and I. And our kids learnt that, they got used to it, and we did it, I think we probably did it about every 6 weeks. So one of the reasons I'm sharing this is it doesn't have to be investing, doesn't have to be super expensive, it just has to be really intentional and meaningful for you. I've also added here, I had a couple come and see me, because in the time I've worked, there's many couples I've seen that may come once or twice and I never see them again, or individuals, I work with individuals as well. And then there's many, many couples I've seen that may come for a while and then they may go away for a year or something and then I'll come back again. There have been some that have come and gone over, I think I saw one recently, I think I originally met them about 18 years ago and they've just come back on and off during their marriage for some help. But this particular couple, I don't really remember anything other than I'd seen them before, then they came back and he walked in and something came up in the session. He said, "Oh, I think about you when I'm in the freezer aisle." And I went, "Oh, is that right? Why is that?" And it was because I had said to them, and they were a couple that everything involved their kids. They didn't think, they sort of thought, oh, it's a bit mean or something to take away from the kids. They've got to be part of everything. So I said to them, how about you get the best ice cream that you can find, you put it in a brown paper bag, you stick it in the back of the freezer, and the kids they're not allowed any of it. It's your ice cream. And it had the desired effect because he thought about me in the freezer roll, which was my intention. So hopefully you might think about this in the freezer roller as well. Alrighty, how are we going for time? Okay, for every, this is once again is from Gottman. For every negative interaction, there needs to be 5 or more positive interactions. So the evidence from their research, I think it was that pretty much couples in distress had pretty much a 1-to-1. It could be worse than that, so meaning for every interaction that was positive, they had a negative one. You don't want that. So you want to be building memory of safety, security, friendship and respect in your relationship. So you are going to have those moments, those occasions where things are not good between the two of you. But if you have, I'll just read this. So the above will help you traverse the tough times as there's a memory bank of goodwill to draw down from when things are difficult. And I think we can absolutely testify to that. When there's enough goodness between the two of you, it's like, we'll get through these difficult times, or it really annoys me when you do this, but there's so many other good qualities and there's so much that's good in our relationship. I might stop for a minute and just ask, does anyone have any questions or comments so far? Anything you want to ask, comment on? I'll leave silence for a bit because I know people need time to think sometimes. No? Okay. Alrighty. Greetings and farewells. This was something, one of the trainings I did that was profoundly helpful was the PACT training with Stan Tatkin, which is a bit of a mouthful, but it was called the Psychobiological Approach to Couple Therapy, and I'm not going to go into what that's about, but if you want to look it up, you can. You can check out Stan Tatkin. And this was something that, one of many things that was in that training. The idea, I might go through this and then I'll come back. So prioritise greetings and farewells. So often couples that are kind of just two ships passing in the night, they're not doing these things intentionally. They might, they part company in the morning or whenever it is, and one just walks out the door with a cursory see you later, or kisses the kids goodbye and just walks out the door, and then comes in at the end of the day, and they once again are like two ships passing in the night. They don't kind of sink back into each other. So this, I'll just read this. So warm and present embrace at the end of the day, before interacting with the kids or getting into the tasks of the evening, can actually make a profound difference to couples. And Stan was saying years back that often it actually can really prevent conflicts in the evening. And part of that is because if you think about a couple that are apart for the day, they're just totally separate in their emotional state, their mental state. Everything is just two separates, and then they can just whack into each other in the afternoon. Does that make sense? So the idea of an intentional greeting, which ideally, certainly is something that's a meaningful ritual and not just a functional thing. So if you can imagine just that kind of, hi, where's the beer, or just a functional activity that doesn't have the investment of like an intentional, let's just reconnect in a way that's meaningful. One way of doing this is having a hug, and we're not going to practice this here, but the idea is sort of coming in, greeting each other face to face. And this does not have to take a long period of time, by the way. Sometimes people will say, oh, this is all just too much, there's too much to be done in the evening, we haven't got time. But if you prioritise this sort of thing, it can basically look like the last person comes in the door, the one that's there already in the house, maybe with the kids, and this will probably require teaching children, hey, this is mum and dad's moment. So they come together, greet each other face to face, eye to eye, and embrace until you feel relaxed. It's like until you sort of sink into one another. If you think about that injunction in the Bible about the two become one, it's like becoming one again, if that makes sense. So this is something that I've certainly seen in my office makes a really big difference. Often couples will be really tense and they just say, Just hold one another until you can feel each other settle, and then you might just branch into the evening after that. So that sort of ritual, meaningful ritual, can take a minute. And I get it, there may be times that's not possible, baby screaming, whatever's happening, but if you try to do that sort of thing regularly as a priority, that's one example of investing and two becoming one at the end of the day, or the morning if you're shift workers, or however it works. I appreciate this is one example that I know these are idealised. People could say, you know, this is all just, that's not reality, that's not how it works. But it actually is. And unless couples really earnestly get it, if we don't water the plant, if we don't do something to nurture and look after our relationship, you just spread apart. You just, especially in today's day and age, I think, where there is so much stimulation, there's so many priorities, there's so much that really doesn't even support marriage, to be honest. It's so easy just to pull the pin. Well, they say it's so easy, but I'm telling you, having worked in family dispute resolution for a long time and having seen, as I'm sure everybody in this room has seen people separate, and you may well have yourself. My purpose in saying this is not to judge anybody or anything like that, but it's really hard to divorce and separate, and you want to try to maintain as many marriages as possible. Okay, the brain or the mind, which I'm still grappling with, that whole topic of the brain and the mind, and novelty. Actually, before I go to this, if we don't invest in something novel, if you're with someone for a long time, like we're 39 years, if we don't invest in something new, you just get bored. And if you don't want your marriage to just be associated with boredom, you need to invest in some things that are novel. I remember seeing historically, and I can't remember the exact time frames, but it wasn't that many decades ago. Maybe it was probably quite a few decades ago, maybe 100 years or so. People were not living for as long as they were, and they weren't, so they therefore wouldn't be married for possibly up to 70 years to the same person. So if you think you're going to be in this life with the same spouse for decades and decades, you're going to have to find ways to keep that relationship fresh. Not every minute of every day, but something that keeps attention, something that's novel. So I've just put, these are just some very small examples. Getting dressed up sometimes, you know, like if you get around your house and you've always got tracky dacks and a sloppy Joe on, well, stop it. Put some nice clothes on, son. If that's your thing. Or visit a new cafe, you know, maybe you have a coffee once a fortnight at a local cafe, mix it up and go to a new one. A new soundtrack. Hey, I've been listening to this, let's try this new musician. Let's try this rather than doing our 70s mix or whatever, which I'm showing my age here. Some variety in the bedroom, another one. There'd be any number of these sorts of things. Okay. Oh, just the last thing I'd say to this. All of this might mean nothing, and what I'm about to say actually applies to much of what I've got to say tonight, is you need to pay attention. Like your spouse could go, I've got some new perfume on, I wonder if he's going to notice. Or a husband goes, I've taken my t-shirt on and I've put a shirt on because I know she likes to see a shirt, and she doesn't even notice it. So it's doing these things and consciously noticing them as well that will make the difference. Alrighty. Just looking at how far where to stop. Okay. Okay, separateness and togetherness. Find the balance that works for your marriage. Some separateness maintains a sense of the self for you both and can enrich the relationship. Too much separateness in marriages are at risk of growing apart. too much togetherness, relationships risk becoming stale. These are not the only reasons, but I think these things can happen. We just this week have heard of, well, sadly, a couple, maybe not this week, a few weeks ago, that have separated. And knowing this particular couple, and we don't know the ins and outs of their relationship, but having observed them over a lot of years, they did seem to have an enormous amount of separateness. Like it just appeared the man was often just off doing his own thing. And I suspect that couple have separated because they didn't have enough investment in togetherness. They had too much separateness. I know another couple personally where for that couple, the man would probably, I think it would be a fair comment to say he would probably spend every minute of the day with his wife happily. And there's historical reasons for that, I think, from his history. But for her, she's had to say, I need some separateness, I need some time away. They lived together, they worked together, they did everything together. Now, that might work for some couples. For them, she needed to say, I need some, no, I actually want to go out and have a coffee with a girlfriend and I don't want you to be there. And he needed to be AI, accepting influence on that. So I think just too, especially as couples are together for long periods of time, having some separateness and together, so having some separateness also can come back and enrich the relationship. You know, you're not part of every, you know, I don't know, I might go to Sydney and do something and then I can come back and I say, oh, I had this conversation with such and such, I want to tell you about it because you weren't there. So this is something else that's really significant. And just to put there, find the balance that works for you both. And the former may require some major negotiation. And the couple I mentioned earlier, that is something that she had to really seek from him. And he had to be willing to hear that and not take offence and feel rejected when she was saying, I love you dearly, because she does, they're a really secure couple, but she needed to say, I really need some time away from you. Alrighty, we might do love languages. Oh, lost my watch. And I'm only going to touch on love languages. I actually have a confession to make. I've never read Gary Chapman's book, Love Languages, and I'm sure it's a really good book, and I'm sure there's loads of depth in that book, so I'm not dissuading you from reading it. I'm just confessing I've never read it, but the basic ideas I've found incredibly helpful, and I've seen them transform some relationships. So do people, can you put your hand up if you're familiar with the term love languages? Can you put your hand up if you're not? You've never heard of it? So everybody's, okay, fantastic. So I'm going to be really brief on this with that confession that I said earlier. So, you know, don't want to withdraw from the book sales or whatnot of this man, but I've not read it and I still find the ideas useful. So the basic love languages, and I know this will be repetition for a lot of people here, but it doesn't hurt me to hear it again, I don't think. There may well be more of these, but these are the 5 that came to my mind when I thought about it, was affection, acts of service, time, gifts, and words of affirmation. And I would urge you all to know and understand the basic languages and do your best to speak your spouse's most well understood and wanted language, and interpret their spoken language and receive it even when it's not your ideal one. And I'll talk about what I mean by that. Many, many times, and once again, this may not be you guys, may not be relevant to any couple, but this is an example. I've seen couples where the man would die for his wife. He passionately loves her, but he's not a great talker and he's not even that affectionate, but he serves her. He's always ready to mow the lawn, change the oil in the car, whatever's required. And that is the language he primarily speaks. Now, if she is, say, if she's a word of affirmation person, she loves to hear, you look lovely today, or I really love you, that was a really special meal, and he doesn't speak that language, if she can't, one, I guess he would be wise to learn to speak more. But she also needs to see, okay, it's not going to come readily for him. but I need to interpret his love for me through the acts of service that he does for me. So that is one example. I've sat with couples where this has been absolutely transformative, where it's a bit like, one's been speaking Japanese and the other one German, and you just have to give them an interpretation manual to go, oh, you're actually saying I love you, but just in a different language. So this can really transform. And I would urge, do them all. They're all great. Acts of service, affection, time, gifts, words of affirmation. Just to finish this too, this can also be really transformative in with kids as parents. A very good friend of mine, she's a very, very close friend of mine, and neither of us are gifty people. We just we're pretty dreadful. We both forget each other's birthdays. We love each other dearly. We keep in touch a lot. And I'm not suggesting it's a good thing to forget birthdays, by the way. I'm just bad at it. And we've discussed this. It doesn't really matter to either of us because that's not what cuts it for us in our friendship. But she discovered she was having real issues with her daughter, and she started looking at this, and she realised that her daughter is very much a gifts person. So she would often, she's a real talker, so she'd say she loves her and she's saying all the right things, but she wasn't reaching her daughter. And then she realised, she really loves gifts. Now, was she going out and buying her expensive gifts? No, she wasn't. But she started just doing, it might have just been a small, meaningful something that was in a gift form for her daughter, and it really cut through. So the basic idea of this can be really transformative to both couples and in parenting relationships with kids. So we might, just looking how much, no, I'll do a little bit more before the break. Any questions or comments at this point? No? No? I hope you're finding something useful. Can someone yell out one thing I've said that's been useful to give me feedback? One thing, if you're courageous enough. Accept influence. Yeah, it's hard to forget that one, isn't it? Thank you. All right. We'll do this one and then we'll have the break. Solvable and unsolvable problems. Who knows the answer to this? 69% of problems in marriages are solvable or unsolvable, and Merrin and Scott are not allowed to answer this question. Does anyone know the answer? 69% of problems in marriages are found from the research to be solvable or unsolvable, as in they're just perpetual, they're just going to keep happening. Unsolvable? You think? Yeah, I know Jono's just saying that to... What's that? You'd hope you would hope they're solvable, but they're not, which obviously many people in the room know this. I'm going to share some examples in a minute of this. If you don't know the former, you could think your marriage, your relationship is doomed. But the reality is most problems that come up are not going to be solved. They have to be managed. Some unsolvable issues will be about you and your spouse's strengths and weaknesses. Some qualities may drive you crazy at times, but they'll also bring complementarity to your marriage. I suspect, I'm going to put him in the firing line, not say too much, but I think this applies to my steward and I. We complement each other beautifully, but there are qualities about each other that at times drive each other mad. But they're the qualities also that enrich our marriage because we do complement each other. So I thought I would just, just to say too, most unsolvable problems won't be deal breakers. It is certainly possible that some could be deal breakers. Obviously, affairs, betrayal, there's certainly going to be some problems that are there that's like, no, that's unsolvable and it's not tolerable either. But many are not like that. And I'll just read what I've written here. The challenge is not to get gridlocked over them and instead to listen, respect, dialogue and accept differences. If there is gridlock about something, try and understand your partner's perspective. There is actually, I'll just grab a book. If you had, I think it's in this one. I think it's called A Horse Called Daphne. I haven't looked at this for a while, but this is the John Gottman book, The 7 Principles for Making Marriage Work. There's a section in here that's really good on gridlocked issues, things that you just keep that keep resurfacing and the couple just keep getting stuck on. And part of it is uncovering really what's behind the gridlock problem. If you're interested, you can ask me to borrow the book and have a look at it. But I just thought I'd just share some examples of unsolvable problems that I thought up. I like lots of affection. You don't. This is not us, by the way. I'm just sharing this that someone could say it. I like lots of affection. You don't. I like crunchy butter, peanut butter. You like smooth. I talk to process my thoughts. You just process them in your head. Now, that could be, they're differences. That's not going to change, but one could really annoy the other. I want to spend lots of time socialising, and you don't. You like being on your own or just having us together most of the time. I'm a morning person. You come alive at night. It's probably not going to change. I love to dance. You don't like dancing, and you have no rhythm either. Now, I guess that could be a deal breaker if your life mission was to dance and do nothing else, then maybe it would, but I don't think it would be for most couples. I like to be spontaneous and you like to plan. Now, that would be a classic. You can see that just resurfacing, you know, in holidays. I just want to I want to go away and just do what happens, and the other one wants to plan everything. Well, how are you going to negotiate that? And those tendencies are not likely to change. You're just going to have to find a way to manage around them. I like loud music, you like it really soft. I like rock music, you like classics. You prefer comedies, I like dramas. Now, they're just, some of those are pretty, shallow topics, but they're examples. So why mention this? Because a lot of couples, when you ask this question, they say 69% are solvable. So you can see if they believed that, they could just pull the pin on a perfectly good marriage, potentially. We're going to have a break. I think I've got the timing around about right. Does that sound good, Zach? Yep, cool. Alrighty, so great. Yep. There's some nummies out the back. Lovely. So enjoy. And for how long, Zach? About 20 minutes. Fantastic. All good. Enjoy. Great. Thank you for preparing the food. It was very, very good. Alrighty. Before we kick off, is there anything anyone would want to once again ask, comment on so far? Anything you want me to clarify? You may have, I suspect you weren't, but if something might have come up in the conversations out the back. Nope. All good. Alrighty. Hello, people back online. I realised I should have had a break in there, a slide, but we didn't have it. Okay, so I put this one in because I had a conversation, don't sweat the small stuff. I was speaking to a young family member not long ago, and she was asking about, we were discussing our marriage, and I must have said something like, there's so much you just have to let go, don't make an issue of things. And then I think she took that to such an extent that perhaps she thought you shouldn't raise anything, like let everything go. So I thought I'd just elaborate on this a little bit. So I've titled this Don't Sweat the Small Stuff. But how do you know if you can let something go or if you need to take a position on it with your spouse? And just a few bits of advice that I have certainly applied and I think is helpful is to sleep on it or at least leave an hour or two. There have been many times that I would suggest, I've experienced this, and I have no doubt many of those who've been in marriage for a long time, that in a moment you could think this is such a big issue, maybe because you're really angry or irritated or anxious or whatever at the time, but you let it go and you just go, I just delay, and then after an hour or two you just think, actually, it doesn't really matter. Whatever just happened is just not that big an issue, just let it go. Maybe it's one of those unsolvable things that in the big scheme it doesn't matter. So I've just written there, after the above, you'll find many things don't matter enough and you can let them go. and I've just included there, remember you're annoying too. So I think it's very easy for us to forget that and just notice on the irritating qualities of our spouse and kind of go, I'm probably not the easiest to live with either. However, if the matter that you are dwelling upon, troubled by, annoyed by, angry by, anxious about, whatever, is likely to lead you to be resentful of your spouse, or maybe feel really unsafe with them and it's just nagging away, then I would highly commend that you broach it with them. Because I think one of the reasons couples, have entrenched and perhaps separate is that they don't broach the things that are really important to them and they don't deal with them. And the following, what we're going to get into, we'll have some advice on how you can broach issues. I did want to actually say, I haven't... I was just having a chat with Scott during the break, and I was thinking I've really endeavoured. The task of tonight was pretty challenging to try to structure a talk that was relevant to every couple at every stage of their relationship, and it's really not possible to do that because there'll be challenges that are present for, newlyweds or date people that are just starting to date compared to those that have been married for decades. So I am hopeful that I've found a balance tonight, but I am aware that, some of what I'm saying tonight won't be relevant to some people because they may well have well and truly passed that stage of their relationship. But that's just the way it is when you're doing a general talk on marriage. So, okay. So I'm going to just speak maybe 3 or 4 slides on managing conflict. Mostly because I think this in my experience with couples, I think this has been absolutely central to helping a lot of couples improve their relationship, finding ways to manage conflict better than what they are. So once again, a fair amount of this, not all of it, but a fair amount of this is going to come from the Gottman Institute research. So the first thing that is present in from the couples that are doing better is they have soft startup. So an example of a harsh startup would be when you're broaching an issue would be, what did you do that for? Like having a tone of voice or an accusatory manner in which you speak to your spouse, or possibly just a tone of voice that's aggressive. That would be a harsh startup. And I just remembered something I didn't include. And I'm just going to try to remember I can't remember the exact figure, but the evidence is that couples that start a conversation harshly, and there are a couple of examples of starting conversation harshly, the chances of that conversation then progressing to something productive is very, very slim. So how you broach issues is incredibly important, because if you don't learn to broach them gently and respectfully, then things can go downhill very, very quickly. Having said that, for one reason or another, sometimes because we're stressed, tired, distracted, whatever, we might broach something in a way that's, as soon as it's out of our mouth, we go, oh, that came across more harshly than I intended. And that's where this idea of giving and receiving repair attempts is critical. So once again, this is one of the things that's present in marriages that last a distance, is they give and receive repair attempts. So imagine you're talking about something, and as I said, as soon as it's out of your mouth, you go, oh, I just said you always, I shouldn't have, that wasn't helpful. Oh, it had such a terseness to my voice. A repair attempt is literally, I'm sorry, can we start that again? Sorry, can we pause and start that again? And it's giving it and the spouse receiving it that's critical. So I'll talk in a little while about being flooded and why sometimes this might be difficult to do, but these are some of the principles and the practices that you need to be aware of. The other thing is be intentional around when it's helpful to have challenging conversations, and ask, are you available? Like, I have seen so many couples where one just launches into something that's important to them with no regard for whether their spouse is mentally present, emotionally present, whether they're just about to go to the loo, whether they haven't eaten for 6 hours and their blood sugars are low and they need to eat something. It's like, because I want to say it, I'm just going to get it off. So you need to ask, are you available to talk, rather than just launching into things. The flip side of that, though, is if your spouse asks you to talk about something, you're going to have to give them an option when there is a good time, not just avoid it. Okay, these are just, as I said, what I'm going to speak about is certainly not going to address everything to do with conflict, but some of the key things that come to mind for me. When you do have conversations, especially conversations that are intense or difficult, give each other your full attention and go face to face. A lot of the time when couples get in trouble, they're not looking at each other, so they're not tracking one another. So if you imagine, I actually had on a previous slide, and I didn't mention it, something, I'll just divert for a second. If you, this will make sense in a moment. If you think about a tortoise and a hare, what do you think are the key differences between a tortoise and a hare? Speed. Anything else? Focus. Maybe focus. Focus, speed, yeah? Sorry? Soft and hard, yeah, maybe. Mostly speed is the one I'm thinking of. A lot of couples, this is a delightful, and I think this might have come from the Stan Tatkin pack training, I can't remember. But you might have a tortoise and a hare in your relationship, which means if you have a tortoise and a hare and they're yoked together, so to speak, like it says in the word, who is the onus on who needs to accommodate more than the other? Who can accommodate? Who can make change, the tortoise or the hare? The hare, why? Yep, exactly. No matter how hard a tortoise gets those little legs running, a tortoise is not going to be able to keep pace with I always get this mixed up. A tortoise is not going to be able to keep pace with a hare. So sometimes, often in couples, you will have a tortoise and a hare. Now you might have a tortoise and a hare. I'm talking specifically here around the capacity to process words, sort of those relational qualities. So it's the capacity to dialogue, listen, manage emotion, access their thoughts and their feelings. Often you'll have a couple, and dare I say it's often the women, now this could be the opposite in your relationship, but it's very, very common that in my experience, and I suggest the research would suggest this, that you'll often have women that are hares and men that are tortoises. Now, that might be in total reverse when it comes to other areas of life, but when it comes to the issue of communicating, as I said, those things that I mentioned earlier, gathering your thoughts, your feelings, that sort of stuff, if you've got a hare and you're married to a tortoise, if you don't slow down for your tortoise, it ain't going to work. So this, coming back to what I was saying there about going face to face and giving each other your full attention, I've seen many couples, I'm thinking of one particular couple where they'd been married for probably 25 years, and they were a very dedicated couple. They loved each other, but he was a full-on, he was an absolute tortoise and she was a hare. So she could rattle off probably 150 words to his one. This had nothing to do with intelligence. He was a really bright guy in his field. I think he was an engineer. But she would just rattle off all these words, and he was just like, he just could not keep pace with her. And so this was one of the things we talked about. Now, she had to slow down for him. So why am I mentioning this here? One, because I forgot to mention earlier, but also because if you're not face-to-face where you're tracking each other, you could be speaking, saying lots of stuff that's on your mind, and then you go, right, he's heard what I've said or she's heard what I've said. And your spouse might be just like, they're back to the third word you said. They haven't kept pace with you. So if you're going to have, conversations of substance, you need to track one another and you need to go on a pace. And if you're a tortoise and a hare, you're therefore yoked together, you're going to have to go at a pace that works for both of you. No you alwayses and you nevers. If you hear a you always or a you never, what's the first thing you do? That's not true. You'll get defensive because it's not true. So I urge you, really avoid you alwayses. There you go, that's lovely grammatically. avoid you always and avoid you never. And one, all it will do is evoke defensiveness in your spouse, and two, it's not true anyway. So really unhelpful. You need to be specific. I haven't got into the key things about communication, maybe another time. And I've just got here, don't expect your spouse to read your mind. Really, really common that we just think he or she knows what I need, and they don't. Or we've told them and we haven't had their full attention, we haven't gone face to face, and then we get annoyed at them because they haven't attended to what we asked for, but they didn't even hear us in the first place. This happened to Stuart and I yesterday. And I won't tell you. It wasn't a big deal, but it was a perfect example of me asking for something. I didn't have his full attention. He didn't do what I asked, and I just went, one, it's not a big deal, don't sweat the small stuff, and two, I don't think he heard what I asked him, so I just let it go. Okay. Just to come back, I haven't mentioned this, but this is really, really, really worth remembering. Hopefully much of what I've said is worth remembering. But tone of voice, our tone of voice is profoundly important. I have seen many couples where just softening their tone, just say you have a couple talking, and let's face it, well, I'll speak for myself. When I get really agitated, my voice just gets more annoying. Hopefully it's not annoying all the time, but it gets more annoying the more agitated I get. Often I think women just get more high-pitched and agitating, like with their tone. Men can get scary with their tone. So one of the things that can quickly get a conversation back on track is just softening tone of voice and being aware that if you raise things, raise them with a softened tone, because otherwise you may find that your spouse is instantly on edge or possibly feels threatened, especially, well, that could be men or women, to be honest. Alrighty. I've just added here, remember we all have vulnerabilities, and these are amplified under stress. Common vulnerabilities include feeling dismissed, criticised, rejected, taken advantage of, controlled or dominated, and the former are likely to originate in your childhood, in your family of origin, and or other earlier life experiences like being bullied. I saw someone just recently as a client where he's got some major stuff in his childhood, in his family of origin, but probably the core issue is, or the deepest wounds actually come from having been bullied all through much of school. So why is it important to know this stuff? Because if you're going to have a long-lasting, secure, satisfying marriage, you need to be good caretakers of each other, which means you really need to know where your spouse's soft underbelly is, so to speak. Not so that you can use it against them, but so that you can be gentle with them in those areas. And we all have vulnerabilities. That's, I think, not a bad summary of some of the key ones. I'll probably come back to that later, actually, and with the window of tolerance. But we'll get to that in a little bit. I'm actually not going to expand on the 4 horsemen. You can readily look this up. If you just go on YouTube, you look up the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, you'll find it very easily. These behaviours are strongly associated with predictability leading towards divorce. Now, I want to preface this by saying we're not talking about it, these being there. It's certainly, there can be occasions where these things may be present. Maybe not contempt. I would suggest that there should never be contempt in your marriage. But if you're in a period of extreme stress, you may find that you've been critical or you've got defensive because you felt under attack. Sometimes stonewalling. Has anyone heard of the term, have people heard of the term stonewalling? Yeah. So just for those that aren't, a stonewall is basically, I'm putting up a stone wall to protect myself. Men tend to be stonewallers more than women, and I think a lot of that is because men can get overwhelmed more readily than women. Once again, a generalisation, and it may be in reverse in your relationship. I'm just going to commend that you look up the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse online. Very, very, very easily accessible and extremely useful. in that you don't want them to take up residence in your marriage. Okay, this one, and I've lost my capacity to show little bits at a time. Never mind. Okay, once again, this was actually introduced to me from Stan Tatkin in the PAC training. Distinguish between threats, big T threats and small t threats. Think people are so aware now, and appropriately so, of domestic violence and, situations where there is a clear perpetrator and victim, but there can definitely be in relationships small t threats, meaning these are some of the things. A threat, what I mean by a small t threat is it's a behaviour, it's something that evokes in the spouse a feeling of being dismissed, criticised, not wanted, rejected, something. So it's not on the level of this, it's not on the level of, serious physical harm or chronic neglect or chronic denigration of your spouse, something like that. We're talking about things that can happen just in the everyday life through insensitivity, stress, that are going to evoke, I don't feel safe with you. Does that make sense? Not as in, I don't feel safe, I'm completely terrified you're going to crush me, but as in, I don't feel safe to approach you because I don't feel like you accept me, or I don't think you value me, or that was really important to me and you overlooked it, or does that make sense? So distinguish between them. Small t's, and they're just some examples. Rolling of eyes, that's not great. Harsh tone of voice. I'll go back to my notes so I can read properly. Missing a bid for connection. So just say your spouse really wants you to enter into something that's really important to them and you just miss it, or you ignore it, or you prioritise something over them. That could be like a threat to them, like this really mattered to me and it didn't matter enough to you, and that's not okay. Being dismissive, being insensitive. And I've got there, not using knowledge of your spouse to be attentive to avoid their deepest vulnerabilities, which is what I spoke about earlier. So this is why you want to have, which is another Stan Tatkin comment, was have each other's owner's manual. If you think, know how they work and invest in that manual, like a book that you just keep investing. Oh, I know that about, I know you really like that. Even down to, I know couples where, just totally different topic, but it might be he loves firm touch, she likes gentle touch. She doesn't like firm touch, so that's a real thing. Some people really enjoy really firm affection, other people just like to be lightly touched. The ones that are firm, if you lightly touch them, they'll probably be freaked out and feel like they're being tickled. So that would be something that you might put in the owner's manual. So I've just got there, the small t's can make one or both insecure emotionally and distressed, though are not big T threats. Big T's are otherwise known as abuse, what is commonly named DV, and should not be accommodated. And I would suggest like coercive, controlling, that the topic of domestic violence in and of itself is actually a whole talk, because I think the reality is there is some, and some may find this controversial, what I'm about to say, but I've seen a lot of couples where conflict has escalated, not because either of them are perpetrators, but because of drugs, alcohol. They don't have the skill, they don't know how to have difficult conversations. They both just chronically evoke distress in the other, and then they get flooded. So, but once again, that's a very big topic and not for tonight. I don't have this, but I suggest, has anyone seen, this is just a bit of an aside for a bit of light relief. Has anyone ever seen It's Not About the Nail on YouTube? How good is it? It's very good. I don't have it, I don't think. Can we play it? No, okay. I commend to you, you find it. It's about 2 minutes long, and Beck, it's pretty entertaining. Yes, it's very entertaining, and I wanted to show it to you tonight, but it was a bit too hard to get YouTube things playing. So jot in your phone, It's Not About the Nail. You'll have a chuckle if nothing else. Okay, back to more serious matters. This one, I've included, because once again I've seen this present many times, and I've seen couples cause a great distress to each other, not through intent, but through their approach to conflict. Before I go on, this book, the John Gottman book, Why Marriages Succeed or Fail, does a really good job of expanding on this topic. So if what I'm about to speak about briefly resonates with you, it might be worth having a look at that, and you're welcome to have a look at my copy. So I'm mostly going to discuss, I'm not really going to talk about the conciliatory way of operating, or maybe I will a little bit, but so the basic 3 conflict styles that Gottman talks about are, there's people that are confrontationals, people that are avoidance, and people that tend to be very conciliatory in their mode of operation with conflict. Now, just addressing the last one, I don't think I've ever seen a couple that are so, if you have 2 people that are super conciliatory, then they're probably not going to be ending up in a marriage counselling office, because they are so calm and measured that they probably don't. Maybe one of the risks with those relationships is they may not have a lot of passion in them because everything's so calm and measured, but I'm going to leave that for the moment and just go into, before I address this, this topic is in no way intended to offend anyone or demean anyone or anything. And this is not, I'm at pains to say, and I've included this is not about intent to cause harm, or not from what I've seen in all the couples I've worked with. But often when you have a dynamic between a confrontational and avoidant, it can cause terrible distress in the relationship. So what's a confrontational? A confrontational person is someone that doesn't shy away from conflict, and they can be experienced as too much and as aggressive, even when this is absolutely not their intention. So more confrontational people they may not think twice about raising their voice, they may not think twice about slamming a door, they just like, let's just go for it, let's just have a fight. Once again, I'm not condoning or suggesting this is physical fights, but it's like, let's just deal with it. We're just going to get into it. So high tone of voice, or possibly aggressive tone of voice, lots of words, maybe physically gesticulating, is that the word? It's a word, yes, gesticulating, that sort of thing. And then you have, once again, these are extremes, but an avoidant. So avoidants have low tolerance for anything they perceive as conflictual and can tend to retreat too quickly. They can leave their spouse feeling abandoned, and once again, this is not intentional. So the confrontationals, if you've got a confrontational and a more avoidant person, the confrontational can just swamp the avoidant and evoke a level of small t threat, possibly big T threat in them if they're really over the top. And the avoidants just want to retreat all the time, which can leave their spouse feeling chronically dismissed and abandoned. I might just read some notes. This was from a talk I gave over 10 years ago. And I've just got here, if you're an avoidant confrontational couple, sort early in the relationship how you can find a middle ground that is enough emotional expression to accommodate the confrontational without overwhelming the avoidant. Certainly when I looked at the research, unless things have changed dramatically, men were particularly at risk in high conflict of rehearsing victimhood thoughts. No, actually, I'll get to that later on. We won't go there. So just the avoidant and confrontational. And also, the more this becomes entrenched, if this pattern becomes entrenched, the more it's likely to amplify. So basically you have, and I think I might have this in the next, So just looking down the bottom of that side, it says, remember, the confrontational avoidant can evoke threat in each other. So the confrontational, if they're feeling dismissed, they'll just ramp up their approach. They'll just want to keep approaching, keep dealing with the topic. And unfortunately, and I didn't have the skill to do this on a slide, by the way, but I used to put in on the whiteboard when I've worked with couples around like the pursue distance cycle, and the pursuer would be the confrontational that just keeps going, and the more they go, the more distance is moving away, if that makes sense. So you've got to turn that around so that the pursuer pulls back and then the distancer re-engages. So I've summarised that as the avoidant needs to resist avoidance and approach, and for the confrontational, less is more, words and emotion. So often just using less words, if you can identify with being more of a confrontational, just less is more. Less emotion, less words, just tone it down, and for the avoidance to resist that urge to retreat. And can I say I appreciate this could be, well, any number of topics tonight might be really delicate areas in your relationship, and if you do get stuck in this, certainly get some help. This was raised with me the other day, and I thought it was a fantastic little illustration of this, is who's behind the drawbridge, do you think? Who is? The avoidant? Yeah. So do you think that avoidance, well, the onus, they've got to pull the drawbridge down if they're going to reconnect. So the avoidant's got to be willing to lower the drawbridge to kind of make themselves vulnerable, but they're not likely to do that if they're preempting that the confrontational is just going to go barrage in there again. Okay. I'm now going to speak about, has anyone here heard of the window of tolerance? Can you put your hand up if you've heard of it? So, okay, so a couple of people. So once again, this in and of itself is a really big topic, and I'm only just touching on it. Okay, so if you look at that, can you all see that relatively easily? Probably not. Can you read the words there? Okay. So I'll have to look at my notes. So it's basically in the window of tolerance, in the middle section there, is when a person they're sufficiently regulated, as in their nervous system, their brain capacity's online, meaning they're higher functioning, their capacity to listen, formulate words, put things in context, have a sense of humour, be present, all those things are online in the brain function when you're in that window of tolerance, or I should say can be online. Obviously you'd have to have the attitude of wanting to be online as well. If you're too far out of it in the upper range, it's called being in a hyper-aroused state. So this is actually central to working with people with arousal issue, not sexual arousal, but arousal issues around maybe people that get really angry easily and need to learn to calm down, but also people that are highly anxious. Because in the upper range, in the hyper-aroused state is like way up would be acute anxiety, probably panic, and rage is way up the top there. Does that make sense? So it's got their emotional distress, can't think clearly, overreacting, unproductive problem solving. And then in the bottom section is being in a hypo-aroused or a shut down state. So very simply, in the higher range are things like the way up is rage, potentially panic, anxiety. In the lower range are things like being really depressed and shut down. Okay? So why is this relevant to this conversation tonight? Is if you, once again, you can look online for what it is to be flooded. Who's heard of the term being flooded here? Can you put your hand right up if you know what it is to be flooded? Okay. So being flooded is one way of thinking about being flooded is being in a hyper-aroused state. So the evidence, once again, this can be in reverse, but the evidence has been that men tend to get flooded more easily than women. I would suggest to you one of the exceptions to that could be if a woman has a history of trauma or abuse, and she'll go into like a hyper-aroused threat mode very quickly with not a lot of triggering. So why is it important to understand flooding and the window of tolerance? So I've put there that being flooded is being outside I've called it the window of tolerance. Within it we can think, process, listen and have a sense of humour. Once again, that's not a given though. Like all of this is also attitudinal, you know. If you don't want to be present to your spouse and you don't want to listen, you could be in that window of tolerance, but your attitude will just still be, I'm out of here. So agreements about how conflict will be managed are needed, so the risk of being flooded is minimised and managed. So this is going to be I think it's relevant to every couple, but it's extremely relevant to more confrontational avoidant couples. It's very relevant to confrontational couples, because you can imagine if you've got two confrontationals, they could just keep ramping up and things could get out of hand. It's also relevant for couples during times of immense stress, where your capacity, your window of tolerance might be that big rather than that big because you're just so stressed. I've said that. Okay, so if either of you are nearing a flooded state, take a break from an argument, restore goodwill as quickly as possible and don't leave it for hours or days. Certainly I'll share, I had an occasion many years ago with one of my daughters where I was absolutely flooded, like totally, and I remember walking up and down my street. I think it was probably, it was minutes and minutes before I was back in the window of tolerance. And that was someone that's worked in this, knows about this stuff. So I had the knowledge and, you know, probably a fair capacity to self-regulate and bring myself back into it. But I was so overwhelmed, because I was dealing with a difficult teenager at the time, that it took minutes for me to get back into that range. And this is, as I said, I'm talking about someone that I understand this stuff. So why is this important to know about? Because if you don't understand this, well, there's lots of reasons, but one of which is to actually understand the physiology of this, that if you keep going at something when one or both is in a flooded state or near it, it can only end badly. You can't have a productive conversation if someone is flooded. It's just not possible. So I have a resource that I've given out many times called Managing Conflict Safely, and included in that is an agreement that couples need to have about signalling. They might use green parrot or purple or just some signalling that which means we need to stop now, no more conversation, we'll get back to this within the hour or 2 hours if it's really bad. So, yeah. Does anyone want to ask me about any of what I've just said? I've just talked about some pretty heavy-duty topics. Anyone want to comment about confrontational avoidant, being flooded, window of tolerance? Yep.
What are some of the issues when you've got two avoidants?
Lack of connection. Yeah, lack of connection. Yeah. I think you can... the risk is you don't deal with stuff. And, yeah, I think that's one of the issues. You can just risk not dealing with things. Because you think about it, a lot of the avoidance is about a perception of threat. So if you perceive something as threatening, what are you going to do? You'll retreat from it. I mean, we don't approach threat, do we? I mean, unless you're protecting your children or something, or maybe pushing your spouse out of the way from a truck that's about to run them over. Hopefully you might do that. But I think part of that would be, if the avoidants need to, I guess, challenge the idea that confronting things is threatening. Does that make sense? And probably also valuing. Part of this would be about, with actually all of this, is how much do you value the relationship? Because for many couples, they've got to decide, how much do I want this? Is my comfort, is my comfort right now, which might be in retreat, is more important to me than calming myself down and going back and trying to deal with the issue? Does that somewhat answer that? No doubt, way more, and I'll go home and midnight I'll go, oh, I should have said that. That would have been much wiser. Okay, anything else? Any other thoughts, comments? No? Okay. Yep.
You're talking about being flooded, but you're also talking about that window of tolerance.
Yep.
I might have misunderstood. You're talking about you can either it gets too overwhelming.
Yep.
That's the feeling of being flooded, or then there's something underneath.
Yeah, thank you.
Also,
I didn't speak about that. Yeah, there you can.
What was the one underneath?
Being down way under it is in being like, if you're way down, it's basically in shutdown. So a lot of people that have like trauma, significant trauma histories are really at risk of this. Actually, I'll share an example, obviously no personal details, but I remember working with a couple years ago where I don't know that there were major issues about either of being super confrontational, but basically just trying to think of some of the details of the case. When they had any kind of issues or he was in distress of some type, he would just retreat. And she thought she was kind of helped. This may not exactly be answering your question, but might get around to it. She would just leave him. But the trouble is, if you're in a really... Okay, sorry, I'm thinking on my feet. If you're in a hyper state, when it comes to relationships and being in either anxious or angry, you need to know how to down-regulate yourself. Does that make sense? Which, in that Managing Conflict Safely resource I've got, I talk about that. So in the hyper, it's about down-regulating, so calming yourself down. If you tend to go into shutdown, which, as I said, is either can be a reaction to trauma, but a lot of people that are really seriously traumatised, they'll often just go into shutdown really quite readily, to be honest. And for them, it's like they've gone too low and they need to be able to bring themselves up, or you need to be able to help bring your spouse up. So think of that couple I mentioned. He would go into shutdown and she didn't know, but the longer he was left alone, the more he just descended. So one of the things we talked about is don't leave him for too long. You actually need to get him up and out of his room, because it's kind of like... Stantat can use this example, which I haven't included in the slides, but of planes and submarines. So if you think about a plane and a submarine, a plane operates in the heights, right? So more planey people might be people that are high energy. They might have a tendency to escalate to anger or something, but also energy and enthusiasm. So they're more flying up here. And then the submarines kind of tend to operate on the lower range. But I'm not talking so much trauma here, but more the lower nervous system arousal people can kind of descend too much. Does that make sense? So in my experience, most of the time it's flooding in the upper, in the upper range. But I guess it's possible it can happen the other way as well. Does that answer that question? It's a big subject, and if you work in, which I also do, work in trauma, this is understanding this sort of stuff and working with people around this and learning to helping them to regulate and get themselves back into that range is really essential. I'm not sure if I answered that question sufficiently. Just before you, did that kind of address somewhat? Once again, online, if you look up window of tolerance, you'll find there's lots of little talks online that'll go into more detail about this. And I'm conscious mentioning this, if there's people in the room or watching online with a trauma history, major issues with difficulties around self-regulation in either the upper range or the lower range, this could be really touching some really delicate areas for people. It's it's big. This is a very big subject. Coming back to couples though, it's really, really important that couples get this, that when you're in a flooded state, when you're too far out of it, you can't have a constructive conversation. And if you don't intentionally go, how are we going to manage this if it happens, so that we don't something happens and we just don't ever talk about it again, or we remain distant for the next 3 days and then we get back together as though nothing happened, that's just not going to work. Sorry, there was another. I don't know. It's just it's just been a hypo arousal state, really. I haven't. I'm just thinking. Well, really thinking about it. If you're flooded, it could be either of those reactions, actually. Yeah. Yes, it could be either of them. It's really just out of the window. And it's, yeah. Does that answer? Just coming back to that couple, it was, he really, actually I might tell you another, this wasn't a couple example, but many, many years ago when I was working with a very disturbed woman, and we're talking probably 22 years ago, and I didn't have the knowledge and I didn't have the skill, and I didn't get it, that I had to really attend to the arousal states of the client in the room. And I had this woman just basically collapse, and she was like in a fetal position. I'm going to sound like I'm totally incompetent. This was a very long time ago. And she was a very, very disturbed person. She'd had lots of psychiatric, she'd been in inpatient multiple times. But that was such a massive learning curve for me, to be attentive to people in my office and ensuring that I help them stay regulated. So what that could sometimes, sorry, I know I'm diverting off couples here a little bit, but I've had occasions where I've had someone starting to descend. I remember one lady, she was losing the capacity to even put words together. So I got her up and we went for a walk. So I got her up. Does that make sense? I got her moving. But then often it'll be down regulating people, helping them settle down. And the sooner you can attend to that, and this is coming back to couples, if you just let things rip, and both are way out of that range, one, that is incredibly distressing if you're basically left with fight or flight, really. And then it's all about you and your own survival, and that's where a lot of damage is done with couples that don't manage this. Does that make sense? Yep.
Can you go back to that slide? You
Yep.
did something on there about how to bring that down.
Which one? I haven't included everything in this.
It's on the diagram.
Okay. What did you...
On the arrows, the right arrows.
Sorry, you want to know what they say?
Yeah, I was just wanting to know what they said. The arrows
Yep.
on the right side, they're the things that bring you back to when you're falling sideways, right?
This one I haven't, I just got this offline. This was not specific to couples. I was just trying to introduce to you the idea of the window of tolerance and what it is to be out of it. Does that make sense? And the relevance to conflict with couples. I'm really touching on some pretty heavy-duty topics here, so I hope I'm doing sufficient justice to these topics, and I'm really mindful I'm probably not, but I'm doing my best. So any other thoughts, comments, anything I've said that doesn't make any sense or you think sounds ludicrous, or no? All good? Okay. If anyone is interested, I do have, which, look, you could find other sources, but I do have a resource called Managing Conflict Safely that I've given out to people many times. And just to finish this piece, that in order to use it, there has to be a really, really dedicated commitment to, if this is an issue for you in your relationship where conflict can start to get out of hand in some way, you have to have an incredibly strong, dedicated commitment to call it before it starts to get out of control. And the way that I've recommended to people is they literally have a word. Like as I said, I mentioned that earlier, I've had people say purple, and purple just means we need to stop. Without all these words, purple means, and they've already agreed to this beforehand, purple means we stop now if one or both of us is at the risk of getting overwhelmed. For the sake of our marriage, we need to take a break now, calm down before we come back, but without all those words, because you don't have the capacity to use all those words if you're in an escalated or lower range. You can't do it. It's got to be really basic and very accessible to the mind. All right. Is that sufficient? Well, in as much as tonight is going to cover. So just check I've done all of that. Lastly, just to finish this with all of this is, you know, even the most stable couples in the world, you throw immense stress, and I'm sure there's people in this room that can relate to this, you throw enormous amounts of stress on a marriage, no one's doing well. So a lot of this stuff, maybe you need to just be aware of this, and it may not be an ongoing problem for you, but it may come up at some point when you hit a point of enormous stress in life. And lastly, and this is incredibly important, when we're out of the wind, do you remember I mentioned way back? I'll go back if I can find it. Oh, this one. Remember, we all have vulnerabilities, and these are amplified under stress. So if you're having a disagreement and it starts to become highly dysregulated, that is when you're both going to be particularly vulnerable to those vulnerabilities that you carry. So I'll give you an example. If Mary's was abused by her dad was frightening when she was growing up, and he may not have been physically abusive, but he was scary. So when he was really angry, he had a very scary tone to his voice. Her husband might get really stressed to the eyeballs, and he raises his voice. This terrible threat response could be evoked in her because of her vulnerability from childhood. Does that make sense? That's why it's so important that you really invest in that owner's manual and know each other well, so you can be tender with one another in those areas. And remember what I also said about what's your tone of voice? Just that. Even if you just took away from this conversation, what's your tone? If conflict is an issue, that will make a difference. Alrighty. What time is it? What time do we need to finish, Zach? About now-ish? Okay. I'm just going to, have I got 5 minutes? Haven't got time to get into that. I knew I had too much content. We might have to leave that for another time, because I do want to leave. That's probably pretty self-explanatory. Sorry, the sex one I'll have to leave. Protect your marriage in private just quickly to get back to that. This little book is a really old one. I don't know if anyone's ever seen it, but that is such a great little book, Good Loving Great Sex by Rosie King. She was on telly like 30 years ago or something. That does a really good job of what's called desire discrepancy, which is normal and inevitable in any relationship, meaning one's going to have more sex drive than the other. And those thoughts, a lot of those have actually come from there, and I know that's extremely brief, but we'll need to leave it for now. So protect your marriage in public and private. I've just put some threats to marriage, pornography and non-accountability online. Sharing intimately with the opposite sex at work, especially if you're having marriage problems. I've seen many, many affairs start this way, not with the intent to betray a spouse, but things go from sharing deeply to something more, and that's how they begin. So be very, very careful. Intrusion from thirds, meaning kind of interference or prioritising other people and things at the expense of your marriage, in-laws, children, work, colleagues, sport, could be any number of things. And might just finish with this. This is the summary that I have for, 3 more slides really briefly. I'll just read this. This is something that I just put together that I often give to couples to really ponder. Okay, so an insecure couple, whether we realise it or not, one or both of us live in ways that suit ourselves and display through our behaviours, attitudes and priorities. I get what I need and want. I expect you to accept the former even when it's at the expense of you and our relationship. Now you might read that and go, surely no one does that. Couples in distress, when they read that, they go, will often go, that's really true, that's what I'm doing. And I haven't set out to do it, but nonetheless we've got into patterns of behaving where we just do what works for ourselves. As compared to a secure couple, and these are just some of the things that I've included in it. We go about life where we both get what we need, we take loving care of each other, we agree to the principles of being collaborative, fair and considerate, we're sensitive to each other's deepest needs and fears, and we intentionally invest in our relationship. And I've just added there, basically what would be helpful is just to have a mission statement for your relationship, and it's like it tethers you to this is our mission in life. This is kind of guides how we conduct ourselves, what we aspire to be like. It kind of holds us to that. And I've just put as a last, and thank you, Zach, for starting today with the biblical introduction. These are just some verses that come to mind for me and there's loads. But I'll just finish by saying the first one, which I've often pondered and thought was so helpful. In Christ, all things hold together. And as believers, I think we are very blessed to have, available to us the grace of God to call upon, and the grace to often be able to forgive when we don't want to forgive ourselves, or to persevere when it's in our own strength. We probably go, it's all too hard, I don't want to do this. So encouragement to persevere in your faith and have Jesus at the centre, because he'll hold you together. So thank you. If we have time and you're willing, and I do appreciate there's been a lot of content tonight, but it would really help me if I gave you a piece of paper and a pen, if you could just jot down 1, 2 or 3 things that you found useful from tonight. That would help me a lot. So if I just pass that book around, grab a pen and just you don't have to put your name or anything on it. And if there's any interest in any other presentations or anything I've talked about that you want me to expand on or speak about something else, you can let Zach know, and maybe we can do another thing another time. So thank you so much for being here, and I hope it was good.
That was amazing. Thank you, Suzanne. Doing that for us for free. That was worth lots of money with all your experience and expertise there. And I know there's so much more we could have talked about, but that was really wonderful. There's lots of things we can take away from that. So, if you got a bit of time before you go, please give a bit of feedback for Suzanne as well. But before I dismiss the congregation for the night, let me pray for us and all the marriages in our church that we know. Father, we give you great thanks for the gift of marriage. We thank you for the love that is there between husband and wife. And we pray for all of us who are married that we would love our spouse, that we would honour them, that we would accept influence from them, that we would care for them, that we would be a team together and living life with a common mission and purpose, and not just seeking our own gain through the marriage, our own personal gain, but seeking the good of the other. And I pray that as a result that our marriages would grow in love and in richness and overflow in love for the world around us. We pray all this in Jesus' name. Amen. Well, thanks again. Do some feedback, grab a bit of supper on your way out, and we'll see you later.